We are now ready to welcome Professor Amartya Sen and Dr. Sugata Bose to discuss the country of first boys, which ties in perfectly with the last bit of Rajdeep's session, the changing aspirations and goals of India. Thank you.
Welcome to what is, I imagine, the final session of the day. It was a great privilege to listen to a powerful and reasoned speech by Professor Amartya Sen this morning on the occasion of Netaji's 119th birth anniversary at Netaji Bhavan, where he talked about Netaji's commitment to both unity based on a respect for all religious communities, and also an accompanying commitment to equity and justice. This evening, we would like to talk about some of the themes addressed by Professor Amartya Sen in his newest book, The Country of First Boys and Other Essays. These are essays that he wrote over a period of 15 years from the turn of the millennium until quite recently. And they have been edited by Antara Dev Sen and Pratik Kanjilal. Now, there is a very beautiful introduction written by Professor Sen on the social and the personal, and then follows 13 essays written at different points in time during the course of the first 15 years of the 21st century. Now, what holds the book together? On the very first page of the introduction, Professor Sen says that there is a shared interest in all of these essays in India seen in a non-sectarian perspective, and they also reflect a concern with equity and justice. Now, it might seem to a reader that the first concern, a non-sectarian perspective, is a matter of perhaps culture and politics, while the latter is something related to politics and economics. Yet you powerfully argue a case for integrating the domains of culture and political economy. And would you care to comment on what should be, or what has been in these essays, your way to bring together what are often seen to be rather exclusive domains?
You're holding the microphone. Am I audible? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess it's not so much I was trying to bring them together. My claim is that they are together. I'm recognizing it. I think it's the social, the political, the economic, and the cultural are very closely related. If you think about, let's take an economic issue which interests people a great deal, like economic growth. In order to sustain an economic growth at a high level, as well as for it to be a shared economic growth from which all the communities benefit, you need things like basic commitment to education, schooling, healthcare. And if you regard one of the challenges of India to be to try to become a modern industrial society on the basis of an unhealthy and largely uneducated labor force, I think there is a major mistake. No other country has done this. Europe didn't do it, America didn't do it, Japan didn't do it in 1868 when they had major restoration. They went straight for complete education and soon enough for healthcare. And that was a model that was followed in Korea, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course in a big way in China. And I think that's the big difference. India is a country where that hasn't happened. It's the only country where that transformation has not taken place. Well, not the only country. I mean, almost everything that you say, there are things other South Asian countries like Pakistan which would also gone in the same selected direction. As it happened, actually, Bangladesh in many ways have done better than India. Now, taking all that into account, I think you can't talk about economic growth, economic development, education, healthcare separately. And that is also a two-way relationship. If you have more economic growth and economic development, you ought to have resources to spend it on healthcare and education. It hasn't happened in India much. In fact, the benefits of high economic growth have not only gone quite often only to a relatively privileged part of the society, but much more importantly, perhaps, it has not gone in the direction of expanding the institution, the social infrastructure. I was interested to see that, since I sometimes are concerned that the most celebrated book in recent times on inequality, namely Thomas Piketty's book, when he was here, I thought that in the interview he said that the big failure in India is not to be able to get the public services and the social infrastructure right on the basis of economic growth. That's the story that we're looking at. I mean, his own book is primarily income, which is not what the only thing you want to look at. But I think what he was saying, that with income you can build other things. So I would say that that's only the beginning, and I don't think you want me to go on giving a very, very long answer. I'm usually accused of speaking, as they say, extensively. But I think probably a breath, and then you ask me another question.
Since we have one microphone to share between us, you will be able to give as extended answers as you wish. But of course, in talking about inequality, you broaden out from simply the focus on income inequality, as in Piketty's work, and your major concern is with deprivations in the areas of health and education. And social security as well. In answering the first question, you began to talk a bit in comparative terms, and this is something that I would like to ask you about. Bangladesh has done rather better in providing access to girls' education than India, but also, interestingly, West Bengal. And then there is something else that I keep hearing in Delhi, which I try to contest, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. We keep hearing from those who are in power today that the western part of India has done wonderfully well in terms of economic growth, and we are constantly told that eastern India has to catch up. But in your work, it's very clear that the divide in India is between north and west on the one hand and south and east on the other, so far as these social indicators are concerned, health and education, but also since gender is a very major part of what you talk about in terms of inequality, in terms of even the proportion of women to men. So what is the comparative perspective that can be truly illuminating in understanding and then addressing these deprivations?
Does this one also work? Okay,
it does. So you can interrupt me now when I ask long-winded questions, and I can also try to interject.
Right, and you should. I think take a case which is absolutely clear. Many things are not all that clear. If you take one of the problems of what I wrote about missing women almost a quarter of a century ago, and at that time, the lower ratio of women to men compared with what you would expect if they got equal medical care and equal nutrition and attention was primarily due to the neglect of girls vis-a-vis boys. Over the years, that differential has come down. On the other hand, the differential that had suddenly come in from the late 90s onward, well, actually 90s, all of 90s, is the differential of sex-specific abortion. So if you looked at the ratio, basically, people may not quite know it, more girls are born than boys everywhere in the world. I'm sorry, exactly the opposite. More boys are born than everywhere in the world. But girls live better and catch up and, in fact, overtake. That's the pattern. Roughly about 94 to 96, or let's say 95, would be the kind of normal ratio. That's the European ratio, that's the American ratio. And if you look at the Indian thing, the Indian ratio has been, for the country as a whole, consistently below it. Like 92, 91, 93, very little. But if you look at the regions, all of the states, without exception, in east and south of India, have birth ratio of girls in the European range. And that goes all the way from Assam to Bengal to Orissa to Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, all the way to Kerala. And all the states, without exception again, in north and west, have lower than that, and sometimes very considerably lower. Like in case of Haryana and Delhi, that may be in the 80s compared with 95.
And the south and east fall short as well, but not by that much. From the south and east fall short as well, but not by that much of the European average. No, they don't actually
fall short of the European range.
Okay,
they are the low normal of the European range. That is, there are a number of European countries like Greece and Italy, which have similar ratios as India has. So I think giving the benefit of doubt, you have to take them to be normal. Now that is quite dramatic, and some of them actually have got much worse in recent years. Haryana. Delhi is one of the worst offenders. Haryana, Punjab, Maharashtra, Gujarat, despite all the progress that you're referring to, it has happened. And in no way has it weakened. So that's a kind of sharp contrast. Now, if you, by the way, Bangladesh, since you're raising that, Bangladesh is high normal. It's among the top of the European range. And in fact, sex-specific abortion is quite hard to find in Bangladesh. If you look for a clinic, it's not so easy to do. Now, there is clearly a cultural element in it. Now, I don't quite know what it is connected with. I know some of it, and I don't know others. I think the east-south, as opposed to north-west division, is a very big division which hasn't been talked about by anthropologists because they tended to be too concentrated on the division between north and south, which is Iravati Karve's distinction for a long time. That's not the way it goes, like a sword, like that. But culturally, what are these factors? Now, there's some correlation. I don't know whether there's anything causal in it. One of them is that if you think about the ancestry of the Indian languages, there are two major sources, Old Tamil and Old Sanskrit. Now, the ones with high sex-specific abortion belong not to the Tamil group, but to the Sanskrit group. But not to all of the Sanskrit group. Sanskrit, as it moved and became Prakrit Pali and so on, and then split into three parts. There is the eastern part, based on Patna and Magad, called Magadhi. And then the part on western UP and Haryana and that area, and including Punjab, are based on Soriseni. And then there's a third part going to Pune. Now, it's the Pune part and the Soriseni part that contributes to pretty much all the lower ratio at time of birth. Now, Magadhi, is that of significance? Bengali, Assamese, Oriya, all were generated out of Magadhi. Magadhi's later form is called Ardha Magadhi. Ardha Magadhi generated these things. Now, is there any correlation of that? is there any correlation of the fact that all the other Magadhi languages, namely Oriya, Bengali, Assamese, dropped gender around the 11th century?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm looking into that. It's not an easy historical research, and I wish anthropologists would be of greater help in this, but it's quite difficult to excite them on subjects of this kind.
But it is, in fact, a plausible hypothesis. And since you've brought in the question of language, in fact, the Tamil areas do rather better on the gender question.
Yeah.
The Magadhi branch of the Sanskrit world in India does a bit better.
Yeah.
Yet, of course, you write almost effusively about the Sanskrit language and literature. So I want to turn a little bit to the autobiographical parts of this book. We all know that there is a very close connection between music and mathematics. What comes through very powerfully in this book is the intimate relationship between Sanskrit and mathematics. Those were your two great interests as you were growing up. And are, continue to be. And so, I think this audience would be interested to, learn from you. What's the basis of this, grand reconciliation, or maybe it's not a reconciliation, a grand sort of connection between a classical language with a great literature and the elegance of mathematical reasoning?
Well, let me start with a peripheral remark that Indian mathematics, which did not flourish in the Vedic period, as some nationalists tend to claim now.
Even though it's taught in some universities these days, I'm told. What it is, I don't know.
You can get a PhD on that. Yeah. It flourished 4th, 5th century onward. And there was also quite clearly an external impulse in it. I think Babylon and Greek mathematics came to India around that time. Greek mathematics was coming in shortly after Alexander's invasion. Babylon was coming in too. I mean, you have a number of the early mathematical treatises which are clearly derivative on the Greeks. And then the Indian mathematics took off in a dramatic way. And when it took off, it not only influenced India, but it influenced what was then the central area of intellectual excellence, namely the Middle East. And the Arab mathematicians and the Iranian mathematicians, which at that time, despite all the division between Iran and Saudi Arabia today, they actually did it in Arabic.
Yeah, it was a shared intellectual universe.
Yeah, all of them, pretty much all the Arab mathematicians knew Sanskrit. That applies, for example, to Al-Khwarizmi, 9th century gigantic figure, from whose name the mathematical word algorithm is derived, Al-Khwarizmi. And from his book Al-Jabr Muqabila, the word algebra is derived. Now he knew Sanskrit. The Aryabhata, the great classicist, who began all that, his book was translated many times. Brahmagupta's book was translated at least 8 or 9 times. And the Vahamihir's book, Bhaskar's book, they were all. So there was a connection to Sanskrit and mathematics as a conveyance. For me, it was partly that I was interested in both. It was hard to do the two together because most schools were persuaded that you did one or the other. You didn't have interest in Sanskrit and mathematics. So they tended to put the classes at about the same time, which made it very difficult to attend them. I mean, since I've tried many times, and recently whenever I come to Kolkata and go to meetings, I try to cultivate the art of being at several places at the same time. But that would have helped me greatly, but it didn't help. So I had to argue with the headmaster and get special dispensation to get the timing changed. So I was, as if my grandfather was a Sanskritist, of course, Amartya Sen.
Yes.
He was
Great Pandit of
He was a great
Sanskrit.
fan, yeah. And so I was doing Sanskrit from, for a while it was really my second language. But I was also, when I was first reading Panini, the entire classificatory system, that is actually very much connected with the foundations of mathematics. As it happened when 2 years ago, I taught a course in Harvard postgraduate mathematics course, jointly with a mathematician friend of mine, Barry Mazur, another mathematician turned economist, Eric Maskin. We did a joint course together on the foundations of mathematics. It became clear why many of the things that Panini talks about, that the central role of classification. At one stage, Panini even says that all knowledge is effectively classification. And I think there is some truth in that. Now, I think this whole idea of having clarity of thought, that this belongs here, that doesn't belong here. Classification, and if you think about set theory, what is set? One set, does it belong to this set or the other? Topology, which is the next thing. Now, these are the foundations of mathematics. Then you can go on to application. I've never been particularly keen on application. The maths that I did in Presidency College as a student, I did economics and maths, the maths subsidiary, but that I almost never used. That was primarily calculus. Not always, never used. I've used some.
Is it true that mathematics in presidency or mathematical economics was more well advanced then compared to Cambridge, where you went next?
Cambridge, England, yes.
Cambridge, England, yeah.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, no. Cambridge, England, definitely yes. Cambridge, England was the leading economic school, but they tried out how much economics you can do without any maths at all. And the answer was found also, namely not a great deal. And I think and I'm always very upset sometimes, there's a kind of division which have nothing to do with each other. Those who are concerned with real problems and those who are not, and those who use mathematics and those who are not. And quite often who are interested in real problems absolutely hate mathematics. And they're always giving you lectures that economics is not maths and you must get out of that. Of course, it's true that sometimes people use maths in economics as a kind of circus, like trapeze jumping. But it's also the case that some of the complicated problems, you have great deal of help from mathematical reasoning. So I think that connection was there. Now for me, I mean, actually, in some ways, since you asked the two together question, when I was was lucky enough to get the Nobel, they ask you to give two things of yours as a museum piece. The museum went around the world, so I kept getting letters from San Francisco, Chicago, Tokyo, Seoul, that they had seen my bicycle. Because that was one of the ones. Bicycle was one on which I first collected a lot of famine-related data. When I was working in the 43 famine, I went to a lot of the old go-downs, as they call, and they had some Furonokata, old things. And so that, and I also used that for weighing, to go to
the children, and
weighing the boys and girls.
Yes.
In my early work on gender, which I published in ’73 jointly with Sunil Sengupta, that was done quite a lot on bicycle. So that was one. But the other was Aryabhat's book. So that sort of combined the interest. It's a great book on mathematics. It's a foundational book on mathematics, and it's in Sanskrit. So it was a great great good fortune that I could assert this, because they wanted to know what had moved me to do the work.
Believe it or not, members of the audience, Professor Amartya Sen writes in this book that he was very slow in making progress with English, which is why Bengali was his first language and Sanskrit was his second language for a very long time.
Yeah.
Now, we are both, of course, very wedded to the values of secularism, but some of our more over-enthusiastic secularists, might I say, sometimes question the kind of support that people feel should be given to Sanskrit, or a revival of Sanskrit today. And I think your perspective is a useful corrective to that view. But having said that, there are certain powers that be in India today who are, projecting what you call Hindu majoritarian values. And I'd like you to ask you a question after reading a sentence from what you say about your school days. There was a lot of that going on when my school days were coming to an end, and undivided India was becoming suddenly covered with competing versions of narrow-mindedness, along with accompanying intolerance, communal animosity, and bloodshed. Now, of course, the scale of the bloodshed in 1946 and 1947 was far greater, fortunately, than what we see today. And yet, if you think about the general atmosphere pervading society, what you say about intolerance and communal animosity seems to have a very strong resonance in today. So how would you feel moving away now from inequities based on gender and class and so on, to think about discrimination based along lines of community, whether religion or caste, and how deep is the worry for you today in 2016?
Yeah. You see, I think the Hindu-Muslim division was something that was strongly cultivated around the 40s. It's important to recognize that in Bengal, Muslim League did not win an election until 46.
Not until April 1946, election.
And
that's
just
right.
a year before partition.
Yes.
And by 52, Bangladeshis were agitating about language, namely Bengali.
Yeah. And by the way, the same is true of Punjab. The
Yes,
Muslim
indeed.
League did very poorly in 1937 and didn't even win enough seats to form a government in Punjab, which
Right,
was, of course, part of the problem
exactly.
there.
So that was a constructed agenda. And it's being reconstructed to some extent now, not in that scale, obviously. And that's certainly one should be worried about. It's got absolutely nothing to do, I think, with whether you like Sanskrit or not. Because Sanskrit is not only the language of priesthood. Sanskrit is also where you have all the skeptical documents, the Lokat, the Charvaka, and recognized as such. Madhvacharya in 14th century, when he writes one of the great books in the world called Sarvadarshan Sangraha, collection of all philosophies. The first chapter is devoted to a very sympathetic statement of materialism and atheism along with it, but matter, and where everything ultimately relates to matter. It's quite a strong, powerful statement of materialism. And then it moved Buddhist position, which is an agnostic position, and so on. Now, it also has the great drama, the Kalidasa, the Varnas, the Sudvakas, and so on. And these are, of course, not in any way religious documents. Sudvaka is, as Mitchakotiko is in fact a radical document, a totally radical, rather revolutionary document. In fact, it's a positive story of a successful revolution and 4th century. Now
and you discuss it, and you discuss Vasant Sena.
Vasant Sena, and it's also that's peculiar. Vasant Sena is the heroine, who is actually a courtesan.
Yes.
So in terms of class structure, caste structure, she will not be given a position of great respect, but she is one of the leaders of the society. And she is also not only partner to Charadatta, the hero, but also one of the ones who, throughout the play, articulates what she thinks about the upper classes, what she thinks about deception, and of the more powerful. Now, so Sanskrit offers all that. So I think what happened is that those who, actually the first thing to recognize, most people whom I've met who advocate Sanskrit don't know the language. Now, that makes it very easy for them not to read any of these things. They don't have to read about Vasantasena because they couldn't. So I think it comes as a political thing. I mean, when I was after my novel, when one of the papers, actually India Today, as it happened, had an article describing me as a westernized Indian gets the novel, I told the editor that I would like to talk with the author. I won't mention the author, he's quite a famous man still, and saying I would like him to come to my hotel and to argue on that, and the only thing I insist on, we must talk only in Sanskrit. That invitation wasn't taken up, I have to say. But I think while we're discussing it, and I know that you don't want really good long answers, there's another division, of course, which is not cultivated recently and has survived, and that is the division between the caste division, particularly the Dalits and the lower caste,
yes,
and the casteless, as it were. I think within the caste there's actually some transition, and there's some ability to square the circle, but you can't square the circle at all if you are in Dalit. And also because there's tribals. Scheduled tribes are still the most deprived group in India, even more than the Dalits, excepting they're not organized in the way the Dalits have got organized, thanks partly to Ambedkar and the recent movement, which are very positive across the country. I know that there have been some very sad cases of suicide and so on, but that is a battle that's going on. But that division, I'm afraid, is too ancient to be put down as a manufactured distinction.
It is too deep-seated and too deep-rooted in our history and social norms.
Exactly, and we have to, and to deny that is it's just not that's not good understanding of our past.
Well, of course, you talk about how to redress the inequities and injustices in our society. Now, it's not possible in an hour-long conversation in which we also must include questions from the audience to discuss several of the essays. But I would like to talk a little bit about one of my favorite essays, which is the Hiren Mukherjee lecture that you gave in the Central Hall of Parliament. And I actually heard you deliver it there long before I went to Parliament. But then, and also it's named after a great parliamentarian. And that essay is extremely important because I find in it a kind of a distillation of a good part of the argument which is elaborated in your book, The Idea of Justice. And you make a case there for what you call realization-focused approach to justice rather than an arrangement-focused perspective, and that is that we should be concerned about the end of justice rather than simply procedures. So you, in many ways, privilege nyaya over niti. And yet, here I want to ask a skeptical question.
Yeah.
You suggest that even in the quest for nyaya, we need not actually pursue what may be the perfect form of justice. That we should go for what is realizable, but then does that not mean that in that philosophical scheme, we may have to make rather sad compromises with what are still deep-seated injustices because we can't quite remove them very easily?
Yeah. I don't think you're making compromises. You are putting them in an agenda which is not it's taken on right now. Well, it's taken on, but it's not won right now. I think we deal with that. Very often that distinction has been misunderstood, and saying that I'm asking for gradualism and reformism rather than a revolutionary change, which is not the case. because a revolutionary change also has to do it in appropriate steps in terms of feasibility. And when there are departures from the feasibility question, as there have been even in Indian revolutionary thought, I think that has often produced the saddest result of not being able to achieve anything. I think a good way of understanding it, I mean, somebody to take revolutionary credentials are quite strong, namely Karl Marx. If you think of his last book, 1870, Critique of Gotha Program, he is concerned, and in fact, he's upset that the German Workers' Party want distribution according to work and productivity. And he said, look, this is not quite right, because you may be not very productive because you have disability or you have other problems, and you may not be able to produce that much, and yet your needs are similar to those of others. So this can't be ultimately what you want. But then after a long analysis, he ends up by saying that we have to accept that we have to argue for distribution according to needs. But no one can believe that that is achievable today. So what he ultimately ends up saying is that, okay, we accept distribution according to work, but we cannot be satisfied with that. So my attitude is that it's not a compromise. It's accepting something with a grumble, and a grumble that should generate some action. And the danger is that you're trying to do something which cannot be achieved, that you end up not making that progress at all. And, I've been, though I see myself in political terms very much on the left, I do think that there was a lot of mistakes on the left here. And here to quote, I'm being very much Marx-oriented today, I think. Marx discussing, you cannot distribute the production and distribution question. And one of the things is that in order to improve the distribution in the industrial income generated, connected with powerful unionism, which is, of course, ultimately a very good thing to do, you may end up in a situation you drive all the industries out, which is actually to a great extent has happened. I mean, the small industries are still there, but the big industries have withdrawn. When I went to London first, I first went by boat because I couldn't afford an airfare, even a tourist airfare. But when I started being able to afford an airfare, and that would have been, I guess, late 50s, I first went in 53 on a boat. But boat meaning a ship, not an adventurous boat. But in those days there were 18 flights from Calcutta to London every week. Now there is not one, there is not a single flight to anywhere in Europe. You have to go to Doha, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Bangkok or Singapore, and then escape. But you can't go anywhere. So,
and I Delhi, think or Delhi, in our over-centralized state structure.
So I think I think that couldn't have been the intention, to put so much focus on distribution and the workers' power and so on, that you end up not having the industries. And there's nowhere to demonstrate the workers' power because you haven't got the workers to demonstrate that with. So I think there's pragmatism is not sometimes in some of the political literature, pragmatism is given a bad name. But I mean, as a philosopher, if I put my philosopher hat on, in the writings of Pierce and others, we know where pragmatism is a central approach to practical reason. And that, and philosophically, foundationally, most important. So I think we're not doing a compromise. What can be done now should be done now. What cannot be done now should not be forgotten. And we should do the preparatory work for that and proceed as fast as we can. So that is what you may call a sequence planning rather than a spot planning.
Yeah. And you've always stressed practical reason over pure epistemology in addressing this question of justice. I will ask a final question before drawing the audience in. This is about the wonderful lecture that you gave at another literature festival that shall remain unnamed. But it was something that showed your wit and humor, even while bringing up very, very serious problems. This is a wish a day for a week, asking the goddess, and the seventh wish was in fact something related to what you talked about at the start of our conversation today, female feticide. But then you started by talking about the importance of classical education. The goddess asks you that, Tagore used to complain about the neglect of science education, and here you are now complaining about the lack of attention to education in the humanities. And in between, of course, you express your wish that all children should go to school and so forth. Now, in terms of schooling, we've made some progress, at least in so far as enrollment goes. There are still quality issues, but we are facing a huge crisis in the area of public health. So, given that you expressed 7 wishes in that particular piece, do you want to prioritize and tell us which one you might want to concentrate on which one is most urgent at this moment in your view?
You see, we were discussing earlier what we like to put distribution according to work and need. And there you have to prioritize, because you can't have both, and indeed you cannot have distribution according to need unless there is a society where the incentive problem has been dealt with. And that can be dealt with, through good economic planning, but much more a kind of developing a society, a caring society, where the incentive becomes relatively less and less, and the material incentives are gradually replaced by non-material incentives of belonging, relationship, and so on. But those wishes that I was mentioning, they are simultaneously achievable. And therefore, I will not prioritize them.
One over the other.
And whenever actually I arrive in, say, anywhere, I land in Bombay, or somebody comes up and say, if you wanted to do 2 things in India, what will you do? So I said, well, why 2 things? And he said, okay, 3 things. I said, no, well, why not 175 things? And we can do 175 things as long as they don't get in each other's way. And those are
and 7 is a good small number.
Very small number, indeed, yeah. And schooling, education, they're actually complementary to each other. One of the first, contrary to often I'm told that I work on development, I haven't really worked very much on development. My novel was on social choice theory and welfare economics. But Development and Freedom is the development book. And there I argue that these things complement each other. So that I wouldn't like to prioritize, I'd like to pursue them all. And then, of course, there might be a time when there are other things we want to do. I would like people to I would like a university-educated society eventually. That we cannot do right now. And so I can see all kinds of feasibility issues. But I don't think they arise at those 7 levels.
And those of you who know the book Development is Freedom will know the argument about the importance of people having the capability to lead the kinds of lives that they value. If I'm following the instructions given by Malavika to me correctly, this is the point at which I should ask for a few audience questions. So I'm sure there are roving microphones. I see a hand going up in pink right at the back. Perhaps, we can get a question right from the back. Yes?
Hello, sir. I think we talked about
Where
education.
exactly are you?
Hello.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
here.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
here. Sir, I think you talked about development in education in the humanities sector. So, as a student of humanities, I'm also observing that there's been a lot of decline in emphasis on education given to in the humanities sector. So, what could be the possible means of a revival in the
But
sector?
in what way do you see this decline?
I think there's more emphasis on education in the sciences and also in commerce. I don't think it's that much fashionable in a sense to
Yeah, but that
study
is, of
humanities.
course, what I'm talking about. I mean, that's not within humanities a decline, but that is a shift away from humanities to the sciences. Now, when Rabindranath Tagore was complaining about lack of science education, and he was right, it was very important. But scientific education, I mean, it could be much better, but scientific education has certainly progressed. Our best students now tend to go to do science, and a relatively smaller number, and quite often when there's competing priorities, they give priority to science. The humanities tend to get the short stick in that. Now, I think what you're pointing out, that is indeed the case, so we agree.
Yeah, accepting that in the sciences, I find that our best scientists are in research institutes. They are not teaching and training the next generation of scientists in
to some
universities.
Extent, to some extent. I think the IITs have good
some
thing.
teaching.
And so do institutions like the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. We do have some very good teaching institutions as well.
In discussing a book titled evocatively The Country of First Boys, I'm certainly not going to privilege first boys, so I'll maintain a gender balance, so I'll come here to the front row. Or are you front row first here? Yeah, please.
You need a microphone.
Yes.
I'm from a humanities background. I switched from commerce, couldn't take it. But don't you think this is creating a severe deficit in the field of arts, where art is becoming severely compromised when the first boys don't go and study arts and rather study something like science, and they feel hideously frustrated after a point of time, if I may say so.
Not to mention information technology.
I have to say so. It's the number of people who took up computer science from my class was not even funny, and about a handful of people took up arts, and it pained to see the number of people who could not speak my native language, Bangla. So it hurt me when I saw the number of people failing to speak about my own regional, inefficiency, and talk about the things happening in USA, in UK, and every part of the world, but where I belong to.
So will women alone have to keep the flag of humanities flying, or what? How do we?
That wasn't her point.
That wasn't quite her point, but she also talked about the imbalance.
She didn't say because she was a woman, she took humanities.
But the first boys are deserting the humanities and the arts in droves. That's.
By the way, before I answer the question, I should explain something on first boys, because that is for the non-Bengali oriented thing. First boy is a term which in the English context will be known as head boys. Monitor types is the more derogatory way. These are the guys who go and tell the teacher that he had seen you go away at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and so on. So the first boys are those. So it's not only about boys and girls, it's also about the way the fuss we make about people who do extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of them in India doing extremely well. And then they run Microsoft, they run Google, they run Deutsche Bank, and they take over half the world. On the other hand, the other half, not a half, I mean, like 99%.
Yeah, that's the top class.
They get very little attention. And that's not a good way of doing anything, and no country has succeeded when its focus is just on the top small percentage and ignoring the others. But on her question, I think again it is creating a problem, and you're right. But again, I think we are emphatically agreeing with each other, which pleases me. But I wouldn't like you to take the next step, which you hadn't, that science education isn't a good idea, and nor to say that computation isn't a good idea. There are lots of very good things.
Yeah.
No, I know. I
Yeah.
think you're talking about balance.
Yeah.
You're talking about balance, and you see the difficulty is that it's much easier to get jobs with computer, for example, than and IT. Now keep that in case you want to respond. Okay.
Let's take a few more. There's a lady in blue right in the middle there who's had her hand up for some time. Yeah.
Hello, sir. So you mentioned that Bangladesh is much more better regarding social development.
In some respects.
But still, in our country, 3 years back, I heard the same thing from you in this literary meet. That means the development of our country is stagnant. Isn't it dangerous?
It would be very dangerous indeed if it meant that the implication was that it's stagnant. But to say it was better than India in some respects then, and it's better than India in those respects now, doesn't mean that they're stagnant. It meant that it's kept its lead on. And had it been stagnant, I would be very worried about that. So you're given your postulate, your conclusion is right, but the postulate isn't right.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see a hand there. Yes. And yeah, I don't know how long.
Sir, thank you for your presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Sir, you talked about the industries going away from Bengal and the subsequent problems of which we are all aware of. But sir, don't you think that Bengal can actually give a very innovative solution to such a problem by tackling neoliberalism, by going for an alternate model where many industries, small industries, sustainable industries. Moreover, in India, we have 120 crore people. So if we have to educate them, if we have to have a sustainable future for them, if we have to have a healthy India and educated India, then we need teachers, lawyers, doctors, environment specialists instead of bankers and IT people. So I mean, they are also important. So don't you think that Bengal actually has an opportunity to reject the model which has been espoused by Gujarat or maybe the CPIM in Bengal?
Okay, that's a question. So let's stop there.
Have there been any example of a country which has proceeded to have fairly fast economic expansion without industrial development, and by which I do mean industrial development? That would be a good example. That's not true of America, not true of Europe, it's not true of Japan, it's not true of China, it's not true of Korea, it's not true of Hong Kong, Singapore, it's not true of Latin America. So I think one of the things I have to resist, and I do resist, is and imagine, that these things are wrong, and there are all kinds of wrong in the system of the world that we have. There's an alternative which is much better. Now, if there was and sometimes new things happen. Various new things have been tried which hadn't happened. And I'm very suspicious of taking people on for what I would call for a ride on the ground that some imagined alternative would be much, much better. When you describe something as neoliberalism, which is defined in so many different ways that I don't quite know what the content of it is. When you describe something as neoliberalism, I know only one thing, that you don't like it. But other than that, I don't know anything about its content. That by which you mean large industries to be shunned. What is a country which has no large industries and still got very rich?
No. So actually, I'm saying that give an emphasis on sustainability rather than
Yeah,
size.
but of course.
Because, I mean, if the environment is gone, we're all dead.
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah.
We know
Yes.
that.
Yes.
We all know that. You're absolutely right on that. It's got nothing to do with it. Because you can do very good environmental planning along with a program of industrial expansion. Now, if you want to take, I mean, you may be sympathetic to the Club of Rome position, which was ultimately busted when Group Brundtland produced the Brundtland Commission report, that the conflict isn't with economic growth. The conflict is with the type of growth and the care we take of the environment. So the idea that any kind of attempt at having large industries must be combined with neglect of the environment, that actually is not a good way of thinking about it, because there's no reason why that must be the case.
You know, I was invited to the Tata Steel Bhubaneswar Literature Festival, and there I cited letters written by Subhash Chandra Bose from Mandalay. We were discussing some other letters this morning, but he wrote to Utkalmuni Gopabandhu Das, who was a leading figure in literature and public service from Mandalay, speaking about the need for industrial progress in Orissa, because the future of the children of Orissa, as he put it, depended on it. But he was also talking about the river problem and talking about the possibility of having a fine balance between industrialization and protection of the environment. There was a question there at the back. Yeah, that hand was up for quite long, so there we are. Yeah.
So this is a rather general question. So having observed India over the last 7 decades and more, probably 6 decades and more as an economist, when did you feel most optimistic about the policies that India was pursuing in education, the agency of women, healthcare? I know it's a state subject, most of this is state subject, but as a whole, when did you feel most optimistic? And how do you feel about these things now? So.
Yeah, I don't think I've felt optimistic at any time since. I was not optimistic during the Raj. I grew up, of course, in the British Raj, and when I first became aware of the world, most of my uncles were in prison of one kind or another. Not that they'd done anything wrong, but they were what they call preventive detention, that if they were left free, they could do some great harm. And then the whole hope was that the independence will come, and we'll do that. And then came Nehru's speech, and the midnight, and we were going to do great things in education and healthcare. That remained the rhetoric, and is still today the rhetoric. But actually, I have not been able to see how this is going to be achieved without actually doing enough about it. You said that schools have expanded. They have expanded, but first of all, there's still many schools with one teacher, which is very difficult since we do study.
And there have been savage cuts so far as primary education is concerned.
And
in
on
the last
top
2
of
years.
that, of that, the quality of education is abysmal. The comparison that I've made, which showed India to be very bad, is with Kerala, which is the best in India, and still it falls far short. So I think there was never this time, but I can tell you, since you put a comparative term, that when I was very depressed, and I get very upset when the NDA Modi campaign was going on, I was told and again I was a UPA supporter. And one of my friends, who was the New York Times correspondent then, asked me, do you know why you are thought to be a UPA supporter, since you're criticizing them all the time? So I have to say, you have to understand the sophistication of the Indian mind in order to be able to answer that. But what I was depressed there then, because I really didn't think that not only UPA, the Congress, the second 5-year plan actually rubbished second school education on grounds of, I'm quoting Mahatma Gandhi, saying you have to acquire education from work. I remember Rabindranath Tagore writing to Gandhiji, saying this whole idea that from spinning you're going to learn what schools do is very hard to imagine. is because what it really involves is the turning of the wheel of an ancient machine with the minimum of thought and the maximum of exhaustion. And so I think we took all kinds of time. What I didn't recognize, I feared there might be worse. I didn't recognize what Sugata referred to just now, how big and savage the cuts in already very low budget would have been. China spends 3% of their income on healthcare. We spend less than 1%. And most of it goes in a way, peculiar way, like RSBI, which is totally counterproductive. You subsidize private hospitals with it when you have expensive treatment, but you don't do the basic public services in healthcare. And that's what I think Piketty was talking about. Mm-hmm. And I think, so I've never was very optimistic, but am I more pessimistic right now? Yeah.
And of course, the slogan of cooperative federalism is being used as a mask for a complete abdication of responsibility by the center on these vital questions of health and education. I've been signaled by the organizers that it is actually time to call it quits for the day. I didn't want to end on a completely pessimistic note, so I will say that Professor Amartya Sen has been exhorting us to engage in resolute public action in the fields of health and education. And if the younger generation of Indians takes that exhortation seriously, then we might in fact enter into a more optimistic phase. And the last word is to you.
No, I think I'm delighted you said that, because sometimes I'm asked the question saying, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic generally? And the thing is that you can't, that's a prediction. But if you're advocating, you can't make a prediction, because your hope is that there will be ground for optimism if your advice is taken. And if you can't be comprehensively optimistic, that means no matter what you do, it will be okay. Or comprehensively pessimistic, no matter what you do, there is not going to be anything. So I'm delighted Sugata came to that. I think we have reason for optimism, and that's why that question was good too. Reason for optimism if we take on the problems of that we can identify. We need clarity of thought. There's an enormous lack of clarity of thought right now, even on issues, central issues like class, caste, as well as education, healthcare. This whole idea that somehow India will become rich and then it spends money in education and healthcare is a kind of totally impossible model. If we have clarity of thought, and if we are determined to do those things that emerge, I think we would have ground for optimism. So it really depends on us. There's a great philosopher and a political leader in Italy, Antonio Gramsci, in the early one of the early numbers of the magazine he started, L'Ordine Nuovo, says that we have ground, as much ground for pessimism as we determine we have.
I know there were many other eager young men and women wanting to ask questions, but please understand that you at least have a head covering and Professor Sen has none, and the evening has actually gone on for longer than we had anticipated. So please join me all in thanking Professor Amartya Sen for being with us.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Amartya, for agreeing to be part of this festival for the second time. It gives us a lot of pride that you say yes to us whenever we've asked. And thank you, Sugata, after a very busy 23rd January to come and so wonderfully take us through this session. Thank you, audiences. I hope to see many of you tomorrow. It's a big day at the festival is Sunday, so the weekend continues. And for those who want to go to the Indian Museum to catch Bose starring Soumitra Chatterjee, strategy. It's going to start in a few minutes, so you can head that way. So thank you. Have a great evening.